My name is Hazel. I am 33 years old, and I never expected my future mother-in-law to lock my 6-year-old daughter out in the freezing snow. We were invited to a special family dinner, but as we stood on the porch, Patricia physically blocked the doorway. She looked at my shivering little girl and said, "Your daughter can wait outside because this dinner is for our kids." My fiancé Colin just watched it happen from the hallway. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply handed Patricia a thick wax-sealed envelope and walked away. She had no idea that opening that envelope would cost her everything she owned. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who tried to make you feel small. The wind coming off Lake Michigan was brutal that Friday evening. It was precisely 7 in the evening in the heart of a Chicago winter, the kind of absolute cold that bites right through your wool coat and settles deep into your bones. I held my 6-year-old daughter Lily tightly by the hand as we walked up the long, perfectly shoveled driveway of my future mother-in-law's sprawling suburban estate. The house was a massive stone mansion in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city. Warm, golden light poured from the enormous floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the fresh snow. Inside, I could see the flickering of a massive stone fireplace and the silhouettes of people gathering for what was supposed to be an intimate family dinner. Lily was practically buzzing with innocent excitement. Her little cheeks were bright red from the biting wind, but she was clutching a handmade card she had spent 3 hours drawing that afternoon. She had used her best glitter pens to write to Grandma Patricia in slightly crooked, colorful letters. Colin, my fiancé of 6 months, had insisted we come tonight. He said his mother was finally ready to truly welcome us into the family fold. For months, Patricia had been distant, passive-aggressive, and highly critical of my status as a single mother. Colin assured me tonight would be the turning point. I wanted to believe him. I wanted Lily to have the big, welcoming extended family she so desperately deserved. We reached the heavy oak front door and I rang the bell. I could hear laughter inside, the clinking of crystal wine glasses, the warm hum of wealthy people enjoying a luxurious Friday night. The heavy lock clicked and the door swung open. Patricia stood there, planting herself firmly in the center of the threshold, blocking the entrance completely. She was wearing an immaculate cream-colored cashmere sweater and a string of pearls that probably cost more than my first car. Her hair was perfectly styled, not a single strand out of place despite the draft from the open door. She did not offer a warm smile or open her arms for a hug. Instead, her eyes darted immediately downward, landing on Lily, with an expression of profound distaste. I smiled, trying to cut through the sudden icy tension radiating from the doorway. "Hi, Patricia. Thank you so much for having us. Lily made you a card." Lily held up the glittery paper, her little hands trembling slightly from the freezing wind swirling around us on the porch. Patricia did not take the card. She did not even acknowledge my daughter's sweet gesture. She crossed her arms over her chest and let out a long, exasperated sigh. "Hazel," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and heavy condescension, "I think there has been a misunderstanding about the nature of tonight's gathering." I frowned, pulling Lily a little closer to my leg to shield her from the wind. "A misunderstanding?" Colin said this was a family dinner to celebrate the new year. Yes, a family dinner. Patricia emphasized the word family, as if it were an exclusive country club I did not have the membership card for. "The adults are having drinks in the drawing room and the cousins are playing in the den. This dinner is for our kids, our blood relatives. Your daughter can wait outside." I stared at her, absolutely certain I had misheard. The temperature was dropping below freezing and the wind chill was actively dangerous. "You want my 6-year-old to wait outside in the snow? Oh, do not be so dramatic, Hazel." Patricia rolled her eyes, shifting her weight effortlessly. "I am not saying she has to stand in the snow. She can sit in the unheated garage. There is a folding chair out there by the recycling bins. Give her an iPad or something to keep her quiet." I just cannot have her running around inside, ruining the aesthetic of our family bonding time. It is highly inappropriate for a child who is not a true member of this family to intrude on such an intimate evening. A soft, mocking laugh echoed from the hallway behind Patricia. Bethany Colin's 31-year-old sister stepped into view. Bethany was the undisputed golden child of the family. She lived a life of curated luxury, constantly flaunting designer bags and European vacations on social media, while secretly drowning in massive credit card debt. She leaned against the doorframe, swirling a glass of expensive red wine, a vicious smirk playing on her glossy lips. "Honestly," Hazel Bethany drawled, looking me up and down, "you really should have known better than to drag your baggage to a private event." Mom spent all day arranging the table setting. A sticky child making a mess and demanding attention just does not fit the vibe we are going for tonight. You can drop her off with a babysitter and come back if you want. Or just leave her in the garage like Mom said. Kids adapt. My blood turned to ice. It was a coldness that had nothing to do with the freezing Chicago weather and everything to do with the absolute lack of humanity standing in front of me. I looked down at Lily. Her lower lip was trembling. She slowly lowered the handmade card, her innocent excitement entirely shattered by the cruel tone of the women blocking our path. She did not fully understand the words, but she understood the rejection perfectly. I looked up, searching the hallway behind Patricia and Bethany. Colin was standing there near the base of the grand staircase. He was 35 years old, a grown man, the man who had promised to protect and love both me and my daughter. The man who had spent months convincing me that his family was just old-fashioned and needed time to adjust. Our eyes met. This was the moment. This was the exact moment he was supposed to push past his mother, wrap his arms around us, and demand basic respect for his future wife and stepdaughter. Instead, Colin shrank. He actually physically retreated a half-step backward into the shadows of the hallway. He looked nervously at his mother's rigid back, then looked at me. His face was pale. He raised his hands in a helpless, pathetic gesture. He did not speak out loud. He was too afraid of Patricia hearing him stand up for me. Instead, he exaggeratedly mouthed the words to me from across the foyer. "Just do it for an hour, babe. Do not make a scene." My heart stopped. Then it restarted with a slow, powerful rhythm of absolute clarity. He wanted me to put my child in a freezing garage so his mother could enjoy her aesthetic dinner party. He wanted me to shrink myself to subject my daughter to cruelty, all to avoid making his precious mother uncomfortable. The illusion of my perfect fiancé shattered into a million irreparable pieces right there on the frozen concrete. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not give Patricia or Bethany the satisfaction of an emotional breakdown. Emotional reactions were exactly what they expected from the struggling single mother they assumed I was. They wanted drama so they could label me unstable and justify their cruelty to Colin. I refused to give them the ammunition. I calmly knelt down on the icy porch. I looked Lily right in the eyes and smiled warmly, showing her that we were perfectly fine and completely safe. I gently zipped her winter coat up to her chin and pulled her soft woolen hat securely over her ears. "You drew a beautiful card, sweetie," I told her softly. "But I think we are going to go get that deep dish pizza you love instead. How does that sound?" Lily's eyes brightened instantly at the mention of pizza, and she nodded eagerly, grabbing my hand. I stood up smoothly, grasping her small, warm hand in mine. I looked directly into Patricia's cold eyes, then shifted my gaze to Bethany's smirking face, and finally to Colin, who was still hovering pathetically in the background. "We are leaving," I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any anger or sorrow. It was the voice of a woman who had just made a permanent, unshakable decision. Colin took a step forward, a look of panic finally crossing his face. "Hazel, come on," he stammered out loud this time. "Do not be like this. It is just for tonight. Do not ruin the evening." I ignored him entirely. I reached into my leather purse. My fingers brushed past my car keys and found the thick, heavy object I had brought with me tonight. I pulled out a premium parchment envelope. It was sealed with dark red wax stamped with a formal crest from my legal team. I had intended to give this to Patricia tonight as a grand gesture of goodwill, a way to show her that I was fully committed to supporting this family. Now its purpose had entirely changed. I held the envelope out. Patricia looked at it suspiciously, her eyes narrowing. "What is this?" she demanded, making no move to take it from my hand. I stepped forward and firmly pressed the thick envelope directly against her cashmere-covered chest, forcing her to grab it to stop it from falling into the snow. "For you," I said, my voice eerily calm and pleasant. "Open it later. Have a wonderful dinner." I did not wait for a response. I turned my back on the golden light of the mansion, holding Lily's hand tightly, and walked away into the freezing Chicago snow. I did not look back. I did not need to. I knew exactly what was inside that envelope, and I knew exactly what would happen when Patricia finally broke the red wax seal. The heavy door of my SUV closed with a solid, comforting thud, shutting out the biting Chicago wind. I immediately cranked the heater to the maximum setting and turned to look at Lily in the back seat. She was clutching her glittery handmade card against her chest, her small brow furrowed in confusion. The harsh porch light of Patricia's mansion still illuminated the frost on my windshield, but the warmth of the car was slowly returning the color to my daughter's cheeks. "Mommy," Lily asked quietly, her voice barely rising above the hum of the heater. "Did Grandma Patricia not like my card? Did I do something wrong?" My chest ached with a fierce protective anger, but I kept my face entirely serene. I reached back and gently squeezed her knee. "You did absolutely nothing wrong, my sweet girl. Grandma Patricia just forgot her manners tonight. And we do not stay where people forget their manners. Now who is ready for a massive slice of deep dish cheese pizza?" Lily's face brightened instantly. "With extra pepperoni. With double extra pepperoni," I promised, shifting the car into gear. I pulled out of the sweeping circular driveway, leaving the glowing stone mansion behind us in the rearview mirror. I navigated the icy suburban streets toward the city, focusing on the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. The silence in the car settled around us, thick but safe. Once Lily was happily distracted by a colorful cartoon playing on her tablet in the back seat, I reached for the digital display on my dashboard and pressed a single contact name. The call connected after 2 rings. "Tell me they cried tears of joy!" Jason's voice boomed through the car speakers. Jason was not just my lead corporate attorney, he was my fiercest advocate and one of the few people on earth who knew the entire truth about my life. "Tell me Patricia hugged you," and Colin finally acted like a man. I kept my eyes on the snow-covered road ahead. "Patricia told me to leave my child in the unheated garage with an iPad so we would not ruin the aesthetic of her private dinner party." Bethany called Lily my baggage, and Colin hid in the hallway and mouthed at me to not make a scene. Dead silence filled the car. For a man who charged $1,000 an hour to talk, Jason was completely speechless. When he finally found his voice, it was dangerously low. "Please tell me you did not give them the envelope, Hazel. After that display of absolute garbage behavior, please tell me you walked away with that deed in your purse." "I gave it to her," I said smoothly. "I pressed it right against her cashmere sweater and told her to open it later." Jason let out a sharp, incredulous bark of laughter. "Oh, this is going to be spectacular. I am actually angry I am not there to see her face when she breaks that wax seal. You realize what is going to happen, right? The second she reads those documents, your phone is going to melt down." "Let it melt," I replied, merging onto the highway heading toward downtown. "I am putting my phone on silent the moment I step inside my apartment. I just need you to be ready for Monday morning, Jason. The facade is over. No more hiding. No more playing the grateful peasant. I want the firm ready for the fallout." "Consider it done," Jason said, his professional shark persona instantly activating. "I will draft the secondary notices tonight. Enjoy your pizza, Hazel. You earned it." I ended the call and let the dark highway roll out in front of me. The irony of the situation was so heavy it was almost suffocating. For the past 2 years, Colin's entire family had treated me like a charity case. They introduced me to their wealthy country club friends as Colin's sweet, struggling girlfriend who dabbled in basic IT consulting. They constantly offered unsolicited financial advice, telling me I needed to learn how to budget if I ever wanted to survive in their sophisticated world. They openly mocked my modest apartment and my sensible car. They had no idea that I was the sole founder and architect of a premier data security firm. They had no idea that a massive tech conglomerate had acquired my software infrastructure just 8 months ago for tens of millions of dollars. I had deliberately kept my wealth completely hidden. After growing up with absolutely nothing and fighting tooth and nail for every single dollar I possessed, I knew exactly how money changed people. It twisted their motives. It made them greedy and entitled. I wanted a partner who loved me for my mind, my heart, and my daughter. I wanted a man who would stand by me whether I was eating imported caviar or cheap ramen noodles. Colin had played the part of the supportive, loving boyfriend perfectly right up until the moment he secured my commitment. After the engagement, his spine seemed to dissolve entirely whenever his mother entered the room. I thought about how easily Colin had dismissed her tonight. Lily had spent 3 hours at the kitchen table carefully selecting the perfect shades of pink and gold for Patricia's card. She had practiced saying Happy New Year, Grandma, until she got the pronunciation just right. And Colin had stood in the shadows of his own childhood home watching his mother crush that pure, innocent effort without saying a single word in our defense. It was a staggering betrayal that illuminated every red flag I had previously chosen to ignore. I remembered the times he would subtly ask me to dress down for family events, or how he would swiftly change the subject whenever his sister Bethany made passive-aggressive comments about my neighborhood. I had convinced myself he was just trying to keep the peace. Now I realized he was just a coward who valued his mother's toxic approval more than the woman he asked to marry him. But the ultimate joke, the hidden truth that made Patricia's arrogance so profoundly pathetic, was the reality of that massive stone mansion I had just driven away from. 6 months ago, the facade of the great Blackwell family wealth had completely collapsed. Patricia and her husband had been living wildly beyond their means for a decade, taking out leverage against leverage to fund their designer lifestyle. The banks finally called in their massive debts. They were secretly bankrupt and facing immediate humiliating foreclosure. They were weeks away from having their expensive belongings thrown onto the curb by the county sheriff. Colin had come to me crying one night begging for what he called a small loan to help his parents cover their legal fees. He was terrified of the social shame his family would endure if the country club set found out they were completely broke. He thought he was asking a struggling IT worker to empty her modest savings account to help his elite parents survive. Instead of giving Colin a small loan, I made a silent, massive move. I instructed Jason to create a blind, limited liability company. Through that anonymous company, I quietly purchased the deed to Patricia's estate directly from the bank. I cleared their debts. I stopped the foreclosure entirely. I saved them from absolute social and financial ruin, allowing them to remain in their massive home and save face in front of their wealthy friends. I did it because I truly loved Colin, and I wanted to protect the pride of the people I thought would soon be my family. For 6 months, I had been Patricia's landlord. For 6 months, my anonymous company had allowed her to live rent-free in a house she no longer owned. And tonight, I had planned to give them the house. That wax-sealed envelope originally contained the deed to the estate fully transferred into Colin and Patricia's names. It was supposed to be my grand gesture, my ultimate gift to prove my loyalty to their family. I was going to secure their legacy forever. But standing on that freezing porch, watching Patricia look at my beautiful, innocent child with utter disgust, everything changed. Watching Colin cower in the hallway, choosing his mother's cruel aesthetic over my daughter's basic dignity, snapped my heart completely shut. I had not handed Patricia a gift tonight. I had handed her a reality check. Because before I handed over that envelope, I had made a quick adjustment in the car. I had removed the transfer papers. The envelope I pressed against Patricia's chest contained exactly 3 things. First, it contained a copy of the deed, clearly proving that my company was the sole legal owner of her precious estate. Second, it contained a formal, legally binding 30-day notice to vacate the premises signed by my legal team. And third, it contained the diamond engagement ring Colin had given me, dropped carelessly to the bottom of the thick paper. I pulled into the parking lot of the pizza restaurant, the bright neon sign cutting through the falling snow. I looked back at Lily, who was happily watching her cartoon, completely unaware of the massive shift that had just occurred in our universe. I had protected her today. I had protected her from a lifetime of being treated like a second-class citizen by a family of arrogant frauds. I parked the car and unbuckled my seatbelt, feeling lighter and more powerful than I had in months. The cold Chicago air hit my face as I stepped out to grab our food, but I did not shiver. I felt absolutely nothing but warmth. Patricia wanted to protect the aesthetic of her private family dinner by throwing us out into the cold. I smiled to myself, walking toward the glowing restaurant doors. She was about to find out exactly how cold the real world could be when you have to pay your own way. The pizza was perfectly warm and comforting. We sat on the living room floor of our apartment, cross-legged on the thick woolen rug, eating slices loaded with extra pepperoni straight from the cardboard box. Lily had completely forgotten about the cruel women at the mansion. Her resilience was a beautiful thing to witness. We spent the evening building a massive fortress out of sofa cushions and reading her favorite books about deep space exploration. I drew a hot bubble bath for her, filling the tub to the brim with lavender soap, making sure the apartment was completely warm and safe. It was a stark, intentional contrast to the icy reception and literal unheated garage Patricia had offered my child. As I tucked Lily into her bed, pulling the soft, heavy duvet up to her chin, she smiled sleepily. "I like our house better than Grandma Patricia's big house," she murmured, her eyes already fluttering closed. "It feels warmer here." "It is much warmer here, sweetie," I whispered, pressing a long kiss to her forehead. "And we are always safe here. No one will ever make you feel small in this house." I quietly closed her bedroom door and walked into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of ice water. The bright digital clock on the microwave read 11:29. The apartment was entirely still, wrapped in a comfortable, hard-earned peace. I had spent the last 5 hours completely disconnected from the outside world, having tossed my phone onto the kitchen counter the moment we walked in the door. I had not looked at the glowing screen once. I wanted to give Lily my undivided attention and to savor the quiet triumph of walking away from a deeply toxic situation without losing my dignity. I walked over to the marble counter and picked up my phone. The moment my finger tapped the screen, the device practically vibrated out of my hand. The notifications flooded the lock screen in a rapid, blinding cascade of frantic digital panic. It looked like a slot machine paying out a jackpot of absolute chaos. 88 missed calls. The number sat there in a bright red circle on my phone application. 88 separate attempts to reach me in the span of a few short hours. There were 32 voicemails clogging my inbox. But it was the text messages that painted the most vivid, satisfying picture of the complete meltdown currently happening at the Blackwell estate. I unlocked the phone and slowly scrolled through the chaotic stream of messages. They were a beautiful, disastrous mix of confusion, terror, and unfiltered rage. It was the desperate flailing of people who had just realized the floor had vanished beneath their feet. Colin had sent the first barrage. "Hazel, what is this? Hazel, answer the phone right now. Babe, please tell me this is a sick joke. You cannot do this to my parents. Answer me. Hazel, my mother is having a panic attack in the study. Call me back immediately. We can fix this." Then came Bethany's messages, dripping with her usual venom, but now heavily tainted with raw, undeniable panic. "You psychotic gold digger, what kind of fake documents are these? You are going to jail for fraud. My lawyer husband is going to destroy you in court. Answer the phone, you absolute coward. You cannot steal my parents' house." Finally, there were the messages from Patricia. The woman who had looked down her nose at my daughter just hours ago had lost all her carefully curated elegance. Her texts were erratic, typed entirely in capital letters, devoid of any logical punctuation. "How dare you? We are not leaving our home. Colin is calling the police right now. You deceptive little tramp. I will destroy you." I leaned against the cool kitchen counter, taking a slow sip of water, and allowed myself to picture exactly how their evening must have unfolded. I knew Patricia's predictable routines. She would have hosted her elegant dinner, parading her fake status in front of whatever wealthy guests she had invited over. She would have served imported wine, laughed at polite jokes, and reveled in the aesthetic perfection of her dining room. Colin would have sat there at the table, quietly eating his food, pretending his fiancé and stepdaughter had not just been turned away in the freezing cold. He would have played the part of the dutiful son, ignoring the gnawing guilt in his gut to maintain the illusion of family peace. Patricia probably waited until the guests had finally gathered their coats and gone home. The massive house would have been quiet, the hired caterers cleaning up the kitchen in the back. She likely poured herself one last glass of red wine, sat down at the heavy oak desk in her luxurious study, and remembered the thick parchment envelope I had pressed firmly into her chest. She probably assumed it was an apology letter. Perhaps she thought it contained a sizable check, a desperate financial contribution from the struggling IT consultant trying to buy her way back into the prestigious Blackwell family graces. I could almost see her perfectly manicured fingers breaking the dark red wax seal. I could picture the exact moment her smug, arrogant satisfaction evaporated into sheer, unadulterated terror as the contents spilled onto the table. When Patricia turned the envelope upside down, 3 specific items would have slid out onto the polished wood of her desk. The first item was the diamond engagement ring Colin had given me 6 months ago. It was a beautiful, expensive stone, but it would have hit the desk with a heavy, hollow thud. That ring represented a sacred promise of protection and partnership, a promise Colin had completely abandoned when he cowered in the hallway rather than defend my daughter. Returning it was my undeniable resignation from their toxic family dynamic. There would be no wedding. There would be no blending of our lives. I was walking away from him forever, leaving behind the weak man who refused to stand up for us when it truly mattered. The second item was a legally certified copy of the property deed. Patricia would have scanned the dense legal document, her eyes frantically searching for her own name or her husband's name. Instead, she would have found the name of a corporate entity, Zenith Holdings LLC. And right below that, clearly listed as the sole managing director and primary owner of the entity, was my name, Hazel Vance. The paperwork was ironclad, officially stamped and verified by the county clerk. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the grand estate she had been showing off to her friends all evening did not belong to the bank, and it certainly did not belong to her family anymore. It belonged entirely to the woman she had just treated like disposable garbage. She had insulted her own landlord on the front porch of a house she no longer owned. The third and final item was the absolute killing blow. It was a formal, legally binding 30-day notice to vacate the premises. The document outlined in precise and unforgiving legal terms that their month-to-month tenancy at the Grace of Zenith Holdings, LLC, was being immediately terminated. They had exactly 1 month to pack up their designer clothes, their expensive furniture, and their towering egos, and vacate my property. The document clearly stated that if they failed to hand over the keys by the specified date, local law enforcement would arrive to physically remove them and their belongings from the premises. There were no loopholes, no extensions, and absolutely no mercy granted. I had saved them from public humiliation 6 months ago, and this was how they repaid me. Now they would have to face the brutal reality of their own financial ruin without my invisible safety net to catch them. I set my phone down on the counter, watching the screen light up again with another incoming call from Colin. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I did not feel a shred of guilt. I simply felt the cool, satisfying weight of justice. I reached forward and switched the phone to silent mode, letting the screen fade to black. The eruption had begun, but I was safely out of the blast zone. I walked back into the living room, checked the front door locks, turned off the overhead lights, and finally went to sleep. Tomorrow, the real war would begin, and I was entirely prepared to win it. I would protect my peace, my child, and my future at all costs. The days of shrinking myself to fit into their narrow, judgmental world were officially over. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I slept soundly through the night. The deep, restful sleep I had finally achieved was violently shattered at exactly 1 in the morning. A heavy, rhythmic pounding echoed through the quiet space of my apartment, vibrating against the hardwood floors. For the past few hours, I had been perfectly content, sipping herbal tea and enjoying the deep silence of a life successfully reclaimed. My apartment was a fortress of safety for Lily and me. The sudden invasion of noise felt incredibly violating, but it also confirmed exactly how weak Colin truly was. He could not handle an ounce of discomfort without lashing out. It was not a polite knock. It was the desperate, aggressive hammering of someone who felt entitled to my time and space, regardless of the hour. I sat up in bed, instantly awake, my heart maintaining its steady, calm rhythm. I did not feel fear. I knew exactly who was standing on the other side of that heavy wooden door. I slipped out of bed and padded softly down the hallway, pausing only to peek into Lily's room. She was still fast asleep, her breathing slow and even completely undisturbed by the commotion outside. I closed her door tightly to muffle the noise and walked into the living room. The knocking intensified, followed by the muffled, frantic sound of Colin's voice calling my name through the thick wood. He sounded like a man drowning. I turned on the hallway light and walked up to the peephole. Colin stood in the brightly lit corridor looking absolutely deranged. His perfectly tailored suit from the elegant dinner party was severely wrinkled. His expensive silk tie was pulled loose, and his hair stood up at odd angles where he had clearly been running his hands through it in blind panic. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire comfortable reality burn to the ground. I took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt with a sharp metallic click, and pulled the door open just enough to stand in the frame, blocking his entry completely. I wore a simple silk robe and an expression of utter indifference. Colin nearly collapsed forward when the door opened, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "Hazel," he gasped, reaching a hand out as if to grab my shoulder. I took a deliberate step back, crossing my arms securely over my chest. His hand fell uselessly to his side, and the sheer panic on his face briefly morphed into indignation. "What is wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice a harsh, frantic whisper that echoed in the quiet hallway. "I have been calling you for hours. My mother is hyperventilating in the den, and my father is threatening to call the police. You cannot just drop a bomb like that and turn off your phone. Tell me this is some kind of sick, twisted joke. Tell me you did not actually buy their house just to evict them." I simply stared at him, letting his frantic energy crash against my absolute silence. I wanted him to hear the pathetic desperation in his own voice. When I did not immediately answer, his tone shifted rapidly, sliding from aggressive to pleading. "Babe, please," he begged, running a trembling hand over his face. "You have to understand how this looks. You are acting completely unhinged right now. This is vindictive and crazy. You are tearing my family apart over a dinner party." He pointed an accusing finger at me, his chest heaving with exertion. "You are punishing two elderly people because you got your feelings hurt. Do you have any idea what foreclosure will do to my father's health? You are putting his life at risk over a petty grievance. You need to stop being so incredibly sensitive and think about the bigger picture here. We are supposed to be a team." "A dinner party?" I repeated, my voice entirely flat, measuring every syllable. "Yes," Colin insisted, stepping closer, desperately trying to sell me his altered version of reality. He needed me to be the irrational one so he could maintain his illusion of innocence. "My mother was just stressed about hosting. She is just old-fashioned. You know how she gets about her events and her house. She did not mean anything by it. You cannot make my parents homeless over a simple misunderstanding. We can talk about this. We can go to counseling. Just tear up that eviction notice and we can pretend tonight never happened." I looked at the man I had almost married. I observed his panicked, sweating face, his desperate attempts to rewrite history, his pathetic urge to protect the very people who had treated my child like a stray animal. He was practically vibrating with anxiety, hoping I would revert to the compliant, agreeable woman he thought he had manipulated into submission. He wanted me to doubt my own memory, to question my own sanity, to believe that leaving a 6-year-old child in a freezing garage was simply an old-fashioned misunderstanding. He wanted me to swallow poison and call it medicine. There was no misunderstanding, Colin. I said, my voice low and lethal, cutting through his frantic rambling like a surgical scalpel. Let us be incredibly clear about what happened tonight. Your mother did not make a social faux pas. She looked at a little girl who had spent hours drawing her a heartfelt card, and she treated her like absolute garbage. She demanded my child sit in the freezing cold so her precious aesthetic would not be disturbed by the presence of a commoner. And you, the man who promised to protect us, hid in the shadows and silently begged me to submit to her cruelty. Colin opened his mouth to protest, but I raised a single hand, silencing him instantly. You do not get to speak, I commanded. You get to listen. You asked for a small loan 6 months ago to save your parents from the public shame of bankruptcy. You cried in my living room about how embarrassed they would be if the country club found out they were broke. I did not give you a loan. I bought the banknote. I paid off their massive, irresponsible debts. I became their landlord through a blind corporation so they could keep their miserable pride. I did that because I loved you, and I wanted to protect the family I thought I was joining. I hid my wealth because I wanted a partner, not a parasite looking for a free ride. Colin's jaw dropped, his eyes darting frantically as the reality of my words settled into his brain. You bought the house, he whispered, the remaining color draining from his face as the magnitude of his mistake washed over him. You had the money this whole time. Yes, I said, staring him down. And tonight I was going to hand you the deed. I was going to give you the house free and clear as my ultimate commitment to our future together. But your mother could not even muster basic human decency for a child. And you could not even muster the spine to defend us. You chose to protect your mother's cruel, fragile ego over the safety and dignity of a 6-year-old girl. That choice cost you your future. You burned down your own castle, Colin. But Hazel, Colin pleaded, a pathetic, desperate whine entering his voice. He reached out again, his fingers twitching. They are my parents. I was just trying to keep the peace. I did not know what to do in the moment. You cannot blame me for how my mother acts. She has always been difficult. I love you. I love Lily. We can move past this. If you loved Lily, you would have carried her inside and told your mother to sit down, I stated coldly. Keeping the peace is just a coward's excuse for tolerating abuse. You did not want to protect us. You wanted me to absorb your family's toxicity so you would not have to deal with the severe discomfort of standing up to them. You are not a partner, Colin. You are an accomplice to their cruelty. You are weak. You are being completely unreasonable. He snapped, his true colors flashing again as the gaslighting failed to take hold. His fear turned back into vicious anger. You tricked us. You lied about your job and your money. You deliberately set my family up to fail so you could pull the rug out from under us when we least expected it. You are destroying my parents' lives out of pure spite. You are a monster. I did not ruin your parents' lives, I replied, my tone devoid of any emotional reaction. Your parents ruined their own lives with a decade of profound financial incompetence and staggering arrogance. I just stopped paying the monthly subscription fee for their illusion. Your mother will have to pack up her cashmere sweaters and her imported pearls and find a cheap apartment like the rest of the struggling peasants she so deeply looks down upon. And you will have to explain to her that her profound cruelty tonight cost them their beloved mansion. I reached behind the doorframe where I had prepared a small cardboard box earlier that evening. I picked it up and shoved it roughly into Colin's chest, forcing him to grip it tightly to keep it from hitting the floor. The sudden physical exchange made him stumble back half a step into the corridor. Inside the box were the expensive watches, the designer ties, the silver cufflinks, and the imported cologne he had left at my apartment. The pathetic few remnants of his existence in my life. I watched him struggle to balance the box, his expensive leather shoes scuffing against the hallway runner. He looked down at the pile of luxury goods he had accumulated, while completely ignoring my daughter's basic emotional needs. The contrast between his material greed and his moral bankruptcy was staggering. I felt an overwhelming wave of relief that I was cutting this dead weight out of my life before we ever reached an altar. "These are your things," I said, stepping firmly into the threshold to claim my space. "You have 30 days to get your parents out of my property. If they damage a single fixture, if they steal a single appliance, or if they refuse to leave quietly, I will see to it that they are dragged into court for severe vandalism and trespassing on top of their humiliating eviction. I will freeze every asset they attempt to hide. Do not ever contact me again. Do not call, do not text, and do not ever show your face at this door. We are entirely finished." "Hazel, please wait!" Colin begged, his voice cracking completely as he clutched the cardboard box against his chest. Tears actually welled in his eyes, blurring his vision. "You cannot just end this. We were going to be married." I took one last look at the man who had promised me the world, but delivered nothing but excuses. His tailored suit was ruined, his confidence was shattered, and the illusion of his perfect family was dead. I felt no pity for him. I felt only the fierce, unbreakable strength of a mother who had successfully protected her child from a lifetime of emotional abuse. "I already did," I said, my voice echoing with absolute finality in the quiet hallway. I stepped back into the warmth and safety of my apartment, slammed the heavy wooden door directly in his face, and slid the solid metal deadbolt home with a loud, final, resounding click. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The weekend passed in a bubble of absolute tranquility. For 2 days, I focused entirely on Lily. We baked chocolate chip cookies, built a massive fort in the living room, using every blanket we owned, and watched animated movies until we both fell asleep on the couch. I did not turn my phone back on until Monday morning. I needed that pristine, uninterrupted silence to reset my nervous system and to ensure Lily felt completely secure in our home. I wanted her to know that no matter what happened outside our doors, our sanctuary remained untouched. When Monday finally arrived, I woke up early, brewed a strong pot of dark roast coffee, and prepared Lily her favorite blueberry waffles. The winter sun streamed through the kitchen windows, painting the marble countertops in a warm golden glow. I felt rested, focused, and dangerously clear-headed. The lingering sting of Friday night had completely vanished, leaving behind a hardened, unbreakable resolve. I took a moment to breathe in the crisp morning air, savoring the clarity it brought. My past struggles had prepared me perfectly for this exact confrontation. After dropping Lily off at her private elementary school with a tight hug and a promise of extra-large ice cream later, I drove to my downtown office. The city was waking up around me, the streets packed with commuters rushing to their jobs. I pulled into my reserved parking spot in the underground garage of my building. It was time to face the digital wreckage I knew was waiting for me. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and pressed the power button. The device immediately froze under the sheer volume of incoming data. It took a full 3 minutes for the operating system to catch up with the backlog of notifications. When the screen finally cleared, I saw that the assault had not just continued over the weekend, it had mutated into a highly coordinated public execution. Bethany had clearly spent her weekend crafting the perfect narrative of victimhood. She had launched a massive synchronized smear campaign across every major social media platform. I tapped open her primary post on Facebook, which had been cross-posted to Instagram and LinkedIn. It featured a carefully selected black and white photograph of her parents looking somber and distressed, standing in front of their massive stone fireplace. The caption was a masterclass in manipulative fiction. It read, "My heart is absolutely broken for my sweet parents and my brother Colin. For the past 6 months, Colin was manipulated by a deeply disturbed woman who hid her true intentions behind a mask of innocence. She pretended to be a struggling single mother, and my family welcomed her with open arms. We offered her love, support, and a place at our table. In return, she engaged in a terrifying scheme of financial extortion. She secretly acquired the deed to our family estate through shady back-channel legal loopholes and is now threatening to throw my elderly parents into the freezing winter streets unless my brother pays her an exorbitant sum of money. She is a dangerous gold-digging con artist who used her own child as a pawn to infiltrate our lives." Please pray for our family as we fight this unhinged extortionist in court. Bethany had tagged every extended family member, every mutual friend, and every prominent member of their country club. The post had already been shared hundreds of times. The comments section was a toxic wasteland of manufactured outrage and vicious attacks directed entirely at me. People I had shared meals with, people I had bought wedding gifts for, people who had smiled in my face just weeks ago were now publicly calling for my absolute ruin. But the public post was only the beginning. My private messages were an active war zone. I opened my inbox to find hundreds of direct messages from Colin's aunts, uncles, and cousins. His Aunt Carol left a scathing voicemail calling me a psychotic sociopath and threatening to call Child Protective Services on me for exposing my daughter to my supposed criminal activities. His cousin David sent a long rambling text message accusing me of being a parasite who targeted wealthy men to fund my lifestyle. Mutual friends from Colin's college days flooded my social media pages with snake emojis and warning labels calling me a scam artist and a predator. The strategy was incredibly transparent. Bethany and Patricia were executing a classic narcissistic isolation tactic. They wanted to hit me with such an overwhelming wave of public shaming that I would collapse under the weight of the social pressure. They calculated that a single mother working in IT consulting would be utterly terrified of a public scandal that could jeopardize her employment. They assumed I would be so desperate to clear my name and stop the relentless harassment that I would call Colin begging for a truce. They genuinely believed I would willingly tear up the eviction notice just to make the digital nightmare stop. They were trying to break my spirit by turning the entire world against me, leaving me isolated, afraid, and willing to surrender. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, the engine turned off, the quiet hum of the parking garage, wrapping around me like a shield. I read every single message. I listened to every single voicemail. I absorbed the full impact of their hatred. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel an ounce of panic or shame. Instead, I felt a cold, sharp surge of pure adrenaline. They had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy them permanently. They had assumed I would react emotionally. They had assumed I would immediately jump onto social media to defend myself, writing long, frantic paragraphs trying to explain my side of the story and prove my innocence. They wanted me to engage because engagement would give their lies credibility and draw me into a public mudslinging contest where they held the home court advantage. I refused to take the bait. I did not reply to a single text. I did not answer a single phone call. I did not post a single defense on my social media profiles. Silence is the most terrifying response you can give to a narcissist because it deprives them of the fuel they need to keep their fire burning. When you do not react, they begin to panic, and when they panic, they make massive unforced errors. I opened my secure email application and drafted a new message to Jason. I titled it Defamation Evidence File 1. I systematically went through every social media platform. I took high-resolution screenshots of Bethany's original post, ensuring the timestamps, view counts, and specific threatening language were clearly visible. I documented the fact that she explicitly named me and accused me of extortion and fraud. I screenshot every hateful comment left by their family members, capturing the exact network of people participating in the smear campaign. I exported the threatening audio files from Aunt Carol and the vicious text messages from Colin's cousins. I bundled everything into a heavily encrypted zip folder and attached it to the email. My message to Jason was brief and professional. They took the bait. Here is the first wave of evidence. Let them keep talking. Do not issue any cease and desist letters yet. I want them to dig this hole as deep as possible before we bury them in it. Jason replied less than 2 minutes later. His email contained only 2 sentences. This is a slam dunk libel and defamation case. I am forwarding this to our litigation specialists right now so we can begin calculating financial damages based on corporate interference. I locked my phone and dropped it back into my leather purse. The Blackwell family thought they were orchestrating my social execution. They thought they were burying me under a mountain of public shame and ruining my modest professional reputation. They had absolutely no idea that they were just laying the foundation for their own total financial annihilation. I knew that by the end of the week, they would deeply regret ever trying to publicly humiliate me. The consequences of their profound arrogance would be absolute and inescapable. Every word Bethany typed, every lie Patricia spread, every threat their extended family sent was another brick in the prison I was carefully building for them. They were doing all the heavy lifting for me, providing my legal team with undeniable written proof of malicious defamation. I stepped out of my car, smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored suit jacket, and walked toward the private elevator that led to my executive penthouse office. The digital storm was raging furiously outside my walls, but I was the one controlling the weather. I pressed the elevator button and smiled, ready to face the day. I was no longer a victim in their twisted family game. I stepped out of the private elevator and walked into the quiet hum of my corporate sanctuary. The penthouse level of the Zenith Holdings building was a masterpiece of modern architecture. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. The floors were polished concrete, and the walls were soundproof glass. It was a space designed for absolute authority and precision. I greeted my executive assistant and walked directly into the main boardroom, where Jason was already waiting. He had a stack of financial portfolios arrayed neatly in front of him. We spent the first hour of the morning reviewing the defamation evidence I had sent over the weekend. The legal trap was perfectly set. We were just finalizing the financial damage calculations when the intercom on the boardroom table buzzed with a sharp, urgent tone. My assistant's voice filtered through the speaker, sounding uncharacteristically tense. "Miss Vance, I apologize for the interruption, but there is a situation in the main lobby. 2 women are down here demanding to see you. They bypassed the standard visitor protocol and are currently shouting at the reception staff. They claim to be your future mother-in-law and sister-in-law. They are loudly demanding that we direct them to the IT consulting cubicles so they can put you in your place." Jason looked up from his legal pads, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. I pressed the intercom button, my voice perfectly level. "Do not call the police just yet. Instruct the lobby security team to issue them temporary guest badges. Then have security personally escort them into the private executive elevator and bring them directly up to the penthouse boardroom." "Yes, Miss Vance," my assistant replied, the tension leaving her voice immediately. Patricia and Bethany had taken the bait even faster than I had anticipated. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they actually believed they could march into my workplace and intimidate me into surrendering. They genuinely thought I was a fragile entry-level employee who would cower in a cubicle while they berated me in front of my peers. They wanted to humiliate me professionally, just as they had tried to humiliate me socially. They were completely unprepared for the reality of my domain. I stood up and buttoned my tailored suit jacket, moving to stand at the head of the massive obsidian conference table. Jason remained seated to my right, folding his hands neatly over the legal documents. We waited in silence as the digital floor indicator above the private elevator blinked its way up to the top floor. The heavy steel doors slid open with a soft chime. Patricia and Bethany stormed out of the elevator cab, their faces flushed with righteous indignation. They had clearly rehearsed a furious tirade on the ride up. Patricia had her designer handbag clutched tightly like a weapon, and Bethany was practically vibrating with aggressive energy. They marched forward, ready to unleash hell on a lowly office worker. But as their designer heels stepped off the elevator mat and onto the polished concrete of the executive penthouse, their momentum completely evaporated. They stopped dead in their tracks. The furious words died in their throats. They looked around the massive sunlit expanse of the top floor, their eyes widening as they took in the sheer scale of the operation. There were no cramped cubicles. There were no harsh fluorescent lights or cheap office chairs. There was only quiet, luxury, cutting-edge technology and a dozen highly paid executives moving with quiet purpose. Their eyes finally landed on the glass-walled boardroom at the center of the floor. They saw me standing at the head of the table, flanked by my lead corporate attorney. The security guards who had escorted them upstairs gestured politely toward the open glass doors. Patricia and Bethany walked into the boardroom, moving stiffly like they had suddenly forgotten how their limbs worked. The absolute shock on their faces was a masterpiece. Patricia stared at my tailored suit, and then looked out at the commanding view of the city skyline behind me. Bethany's mouth actually hung open slightly as she processed the impossible wealth surrounding her. "Take a seat, Patricia," I commanded, my voice echoing off the glass walls with total authority. I gestured to the plush leather chairs opposite me. "You wanted to see me at my workplace. You are here. Speak." Patricia swallowed hard, desperately trying to reboot her shattered superiority complex. She gripped the back of the leather chair, refusing to sit. Her knuckles were white. She forced her chin up, attempting to look down at me despite the fact that I was currently dominating every aspect of the room. "I do not know what kind of elaborate game you are playing, Hazel," she stated, her voice wavering just a fraction before she forced it steady. "I do not know whose office you borrowed to stage this ridiculous little performance, but it will not work. We are not intimidated by rented conference rooms." Bethany quickly rallied behind her mother, crossing her arms defensively. "You are a psychotic fraud, Hazel. You manipulated Colin, and now you are trying to extort our family. We know you do not have real money. You are just trying to scare us into a settlement." I glanced at Jason, who was silently observing them with the detached fascination of a scientist looking at an interesting bug. I turned my attention back to Patricia. "You did not storm past my lobby security to talk about my office decor, Patricia. Why are you here?" Patricia slammed her hand down on the table, finally unleashing the threat she had come to deliver. "We are here to tell you that your little eviction stunt is over. I spoke with our family attorneys this morning. We are filing a massive lawsuit against you and whatever shady LLC you used to steal our home. We are suing you for fraudulent property acquisition, emotional distress, and extortion. If you do not tear up that 30-day eviction notice right this second, we will drag you through court until you are completely bankrupt. You will never work in this city again once we expose your criminal behavior." The silence that followed her threat was profound. It was not the silence of fear, it was the silence of absolute pity. Jason leaned back in his chair and let out a genuine booming laugh. The sound startled both Patricia and Bethany, causing them to flinch. "Fraudulent property acquisition," Jason repeated, shaking his head in sheer amusement. "Mrs. Blackwell, I am Jason Sterling, lead corporate counsel for Zenith Holdings. Please tell me you did not pay a licensed attorney to give you that completely fictitious legal term." Patricia glared at him, her confidence cracking further. "We know she obtained the deed illegally." "There was absolutely nothing illegal about the transaction," Jason explained, his voice shifting into a sharp professional cadence. "Zenith Holdings purchased the deed to your estate directly from your primary creditor. Your bank was less than 48 hours away from locking you out on the street and auctioning your property to the highest bidder to cover your catastrophic loan defaults. My client paid your debts in full and legally acquired the asset. You signed the transfer acknowledging the bank's right to sell. You just did not read the fine print regarding the purchasing entity. You are not a homeowner, Mrs. Blackwell. You are a highly delinquent tenant." Bethany stepped forward, her voice shrill and panicked. "No, that is a lie. Colin said Hazel gave us a loan. He said she was helping us out." "Colin is a liar and a coward," I stated coldly. "I never gave Colin a dime. I bought the property to save you from public humiliation because I mistakenly believed you were a family worth protecting. I allowed you to live there rent-free for 6 months. I shielded your massive financial failures from your country club friends. And in return, you treated my 6-year-old daughter like trash." Patricia was trembling now, her gaze darting frantically between Jason and me. "You cannot do this to us. We are prominent members of this community. We have standing. You have absolutely nothing," I corrected her smoothly. "You have a mountain of debt, a lying son, and a 30-day countdown to pack your bags. But since you decided to come to my office today and threaten me with imaginary lawsuits, I have decided to update our arrangement." I reached onto the table and picked up a crisp white document printed on heavy stock paper. I slid it across the smooth obsidian surface, stopping exactly in front of Patricia. She looked down at it as if it were a venomous snake. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That is an invoice," I replied, my tone completely devoid of mercy. "You have been residing in a premium luxury estate owned by my corporation for 6 full months without paying a single cent in rent. When I was going to marry your son, I was willing to forgive that expense as a family courtesy. Since we are no longer family, that courtesy is officially revoked." Patricia stared at the itemized bill, the blood rushing from her face as she read the final total. Bethany leaned over her mother's shoulder and physically gasped, stepping back as if she had been struck. The number accurately reflected 6 months of fair market rent for a multi-million-dollar Chicago suburban estate. It was a staggering, crippling sum. "You owe Zenith Holdings that entire amount payable immediately," I stated, leaning forward and resting my hands flat on the table. "If those funds are not wired to our corporate accounts by the time your 30-day eviction notice expires, Jason will add the debt to the lawsuit we are currently preparing against you and Bethany for malicious public defamation." "You cannot squeeze blood from a stone," Bethany cried out, her previous arrogance entirely broken. "We do not have that kind of money. You know we are broke." "Then I strongly suggest you start selling off your designer handbags and your mother's imported pearls," I replied coldly, "because I will collect every single penny you owe me." I pressed the intercom button on the table. "Security, please escort our guests out of the building. They are no longer permitted on the premises." Patricia stood frozen, clutching the massive invoice in her shaking hands. The reality of her total destruction had finally breached the walls of her delusion. She looked at me not with the disdain of an elite socialite, but with the raw, terrifying realization that she had picked a fight with a predator she could not even begin to comprehend. She had walked into my building expecting to crush a helpless victim. She was walking out as a ruined homeless debtor. The security guards entered the boardroom, standing politely but firmly behind the two women. Patricia did not say another word. She turned completely silent and hollowed out and walked toward the elevator on trembling legs. Bethany followed her mother, wiping terrified tears from her face. Her phone clutched tightly in her hand, likely already drafting a panicked message to Colin. I watched the elevator doors slide shut, sealing them inside. The boardroom returned to its peaceful, quiet state. I sat back down in my chair and looked over at Jason. "Well," Jason said, adjusting his tie with a satisfied grin, "I think the meeting went rather well." I picked up my pen and pulled the next file toward me. "It went perfectly," I agreed. "Now let us talk about Colin's financial audit. I have a feeling his betrayal goes much deeper than just being a coward." The polished concrete floors of my penthouse office still seemed to echo with the frantic clicking of Patricia and Bethany retreating to the elevator. I sat across from Jason, watching the digital floor indicator confirm their descent to the lobby. We did not celebrate or gloat. We simply opened the next file folder. However, the true depth of Colin's desperation did not fully reveal itself until exactly 48 hours later. On Wednesday morning, a legal courier arrived directly at the reception desk of Zenith Holdings. He carried a thick manila envelope demanding my personal signature. I signed the manifest and carried the heavy package to the glass-walled boardroom where Jason was preparing for a call. I tossed the envelope onto the obsidian table. The return address belonged to a firm known for aggressive sensationalist litigation. They specialized in dragging prominent figures through the mud, hoping for a quick settlement to make bad press go away. Jason sliced the envelope open. As he spread the documents across the table, his professional demeanor hardened into a mask of pure disbelief. He picked up the primary filing and let out a sharp scoff of absolute disgust. It was a formal civil lawsuit. The plaintiff was Colin. His legal counsel was Trent Bolton, an attorney notorious in Chicago for his loud suits and even louder courtroom theatrics. He practiced extortion disguised as litigation. Colin was suing me for palimony. The sheer absurdity of the legal filing was almost physically staggering. The document was a masterclass in creative fiction and fragile male ego. According to Trent Bolton, Colin and I had been engaged in a serious cohabitation arrangement that legally functioned as a common-law marriage. The lawsuit claimed that because Colin kept a toothbrush, a few tailored suits, and a collection of expensive watches at my apartment, he was legally entitled to the lifestyle to which he had become accustomed. It was the most pathetic legal maneuver I had ever seen. Colin was attempting to use the relationship he had betrayed as a weapon to secure financial dominance over me. But the lawsuit did not stop at demanding basic alimony. The claims grew increasingly unhinged with every page. Colin argued that during our engagement, we had shared a unified financial vision. He falsely claimed that he had provided essential emotional support and strategic counsel that enabled me to successfully manage Zenith Holdings. He was trying to argue that my corporation was essentially a joint marital asset. Because he had occasionally asked how my day was over dinner, he believed he was entitled to 50% of my entire corporate portfolio. The crowning jewel of his delusion was the specific targeting of his parents' estate. The lawsuit explicitly demanded that the property deed currently held by my blind corporation be immediately frozen. Trent Bolton argued that since the estate was purchased during our engagement, Colin had a rightful 50% ownership stake in the property. Colin was attempting to legally steal the home I had purchased with my own hard-earned money and transfer it entirely into his own name. He wanted to look like the wealthy savior of his family by robbing the woman he had promised to marry. Tucked beneath the aggressive court filings was a personal demand letter printed on heavy cream-colored stationery. Jason read it aloud, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The letter was a thinly veiled threat of total financial and social annihilation. Trent Bolton stated that palimony suits involving high-net-worth individuals inevitably attract intense media scrutiny. He pointed out that my data security firm relied heavily on discretion and pristine public trust. If we went to court, he promised to subpoena my clients and drag the litigation out for a decade. He threatened to drag my name through the mud, making sure every business journal covered the scandalous details of our broken engagement. The demand letter concluded with a smug, calculated ultimatum. Trent Bolton offered a simple resolution to make the entire nightmare disappear. If I immediately signed the deed of the suburban estate over to Colin and dropped all claims for the 6 months of back rent, the palimony lawsuit would be permanently withdrawn. They framed it as a generous compromise. They thought the threat of public corporate exposure would terrify me into surrendering the house to protect my business empire. I sat back in my leather chair, digesting the absolute audacity of the threat. They thought I was a vulnerable woman who would sacrifice her assets to avoid a public fight. They assumed I would shrink away from conflict just like Colin always did. They fundamentally misunderstood the kind of person who builds a technology empire from nothing. You do not survive in my industry by backing down from bullies. You survive by crushing them so thoroughly that no one dares challenge you again. Jason threw the demand letter back onto the table. This is pure extortion, Hazel. Trent Bolton knows this case has zero legal merit. Illinois does not recognize common law marriage, let alone palimony for a short engagement, where the parties maintained separate legal residences. Colin is paying this clown to harass you into submission. We can file a motion to dismiss this garbage immediately and seek sanctions against Bolton. I looked at the documents, feeling that same cold, sharp adrenaline pumping quickly through my veins. A simple dismissal was not enough. It would allow Colin to walk away thinking he had put up a good fight. It would allow Patricia and Bethany to maintain their delusion that they were victims. I did not want to just swat them away like a nuisance. I wanted to dismantle their entire reality. No, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Do not file the motion to dismiss yet. Let them believe they have the upper hand. Let them celebrate their clever little legal trap. Jason raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. What exactly do you have in mind? I picked up my phone, which had been silent since the weekend. I navigated to my blocked messages folder. Unsurprisingly, Colin had violated my strict no-contact order immediately. He had sent a lengthy email attempting to sound like a reasonable, mature businessman. He wrote that he harbored no ill will, but he had to protect what was rightfully his. He suggested that if I just did the right thing and signed the house over, we could part ways as friends. He even had the nerve to add that his mother was willing to forgive my dramatic outburst if I surrendered the deed quietly. Simultaneously, Bethany had returned to her social media smear campaign with renewed vigor. She posted a triumphant cryptic update about how justice was finally being served and how her family was standing strong against malicious extortion. The comments from their elite social circle poured in praising their resilience and condemning my supposed greed. They were prematurely taking a victory lap, completely intoxicated by their own false narrative. They thought they had outsmarted the tech CEO. They believed their aggressive legal threat had placed me in a psychological chokehold. They think they have me cornered, I said to Jason, turning the phone screen off and sliding it across the table. They think this lawsuit is going to force me to hand over a multi-million-dollar property because I am afraid of a little bad press. They want to play forensic accounting games. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the sprawling Chicago skyline. The gray winter clouds were gathering heavily over the city, threatening a massive storm. Inside my office, the air was electric with anticipation. Let us give them exactly what they asked for, I instructed, turning back to face my attorney. Colin wants to talk about shared financial visions. He wants to open up the books and look at our joint assets during the engagement. I want a complete, brutal forensic audit of every single transaction that occurred in the joint wedding account I established for us. I want every bank statement, every transfer log, and every credit card receipt pulled and analyzed by the end of the day. Jason smiled, his eyes gleaming with the predatory thrill of an impending legal slaughter. He understood exactly what I was building. He knew that when you flip over a rock in a toxic family's garden, you always find the ugliest parasites hiding in the dark. We will not defend against a palimony suit, I stated firmly, my voice echoing in the glass room. We are going to let them walk right into a mediation room, feeling like absolute kings of the world. And then we are going to drop the financial audit right on their smug faces. If Colin wants to use the legal system to extort me, we will use the legal system to show his family exactly who they raised. Prepare the audit, Jason. It is time to go hunting. The team of forensic accountants arrived at Zenith Holdings before noon the very next day. I had explicitly refused to entertain Trent Bolton's ridiculous settlement offer, and I instructed Jason to ignore every phone call from Colin's legal team. We were going dark. The sudden radio silence would rattle them, but I needed absolute focus for what was about to happen in my boardroom. A dozen highly trained financial analysts took over the glass-enclosed space, opening their laptops and projecting bank records onto the massive screens on the wall. I sat at the head of the table drinking black coffee and watching the digital paper trail of my relationship with Colin materialize in front of me. When Colin and I first got engaged, I had suggested we open a joint account specifically to fund our wedding and future honeymoon. Because I kept the true scale of my wealth a secret, I had framed my contributions as aggressive saving from my IT consulting bonuses. Over the course of our 6-month engagement, I had systematically deposited over $80,000 into that specific account. Colin had contributed exactly $4,000, claiming his investments were currently tied up in restricted portfolios. I had never questioned his excuses. I had trusted him completely. That blind trust was the single greatest mistake of my life, but it was a mistake I was about to rectify with absolute surgical precision. Jason stood by the main projection screen, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes darting across the spreadsheets. I want every single outbound transfer flagged and traced, Jason commanded the room. If a single cent left that joint account without Hazel's direct authorization, I want to know the exact time, the date, and the destination routing number. Leave absolutely nothing unchecked. The analysts worked with terrifying speed. For the first 2 hours, the ledgers looked relatively normal. There were payments to the wedding planner, deposits for the venue, and retainers for the floral arrangements. I watched the numbers scroll past, feeling a phantom ache for the wedding I had genuinely been excited to have. But then the lead accountant, a sharp woman named Rebecca, paused her scrolling. She zoomed in on a block of transactions from 4 months ago. Miss Vance, Rebecca said, pointing her pen at the screen. Did you authorize a series of staggered wire transfers starting in early October? I leaned forward, narrowing my eyes at the projected ledger. There were 4 separate outbound transfers, each exactly $4,900, spread out over 2 weeks. No, I replied, my voice tight. Colin told me he was managing the vendor payments, but those amounts do not match any of our wedding invoices. Rebecca's fingers flew across her keyboard, cross-referencing the routing numbers. The transfers continued, she stated grimly. It looks like he started moving larger amounts in November. 7,000 here, 8,000 there. He was keeping the transactions just under the threshold that would automatically trigger a fraud alert from the bank. He was carefully draining the account over a period of 5 months. The sheer volume of the missing money began to reveal itself on the screen. The total calculated at the bottom of the spreadsheet turned a glaring bright red. Colin had siphoned exactly $62,400 from our joint wedding fund. He had stolen my money. The man who had held my hand and promised to build a life with me. The man who had stood in my apartment begging for his relationship just days ago was a calculated, systematic thief. He was not just a coward who folded under his mother's overbearing presence. He was actively, maliciously robbing the woman he claimed to love. A wave of profound disgust washed over me, replacing any lingering sorrow I might have held for our broken engagement. Jason let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Well, that certainly changes the landscape of the palimony suit," Jason murmured, tapping his pen against the table. "He is accusing you of hiding corporate assets while he was literally embezzling tens of thousands of dollars from a joint marital fund. This is not just a breach of contract, Hazel. This is felony theft. The district attorney would have an absolute field day with these records." But my mind was already moving past the simple fact of the theft. I needed to know the motive. Colin was arrogant and spineless, but he was also terrified of risk. He would not have stolen 60 grand just to buy himself expensive watches or luxury suits. He was hiding something massive. "Track the destination accounts," I ordered the financial team, my voice echoing sharply in the quiet boardroom. "Where exactly did my money go? I want names attached to every single receiving account by the end of the hour." The room fell into a tense, focused silence as the analysts traced the digital footprints. I paced the length of the boardroom, watching the gray storm clouds roll over Chicago. My phone remained silent, sealed away in my desk drawer. I imagined Colin sitting in his lawyer's office, feeling triumphant, believing his aggressive legal threat had forced me into submission. He thought his palimony suit was a masterstroke of intimidation. He had completely forgotten the golden rule of litigation. You never invite a forensic audit when your own hands are covered in dirt. "Miss Vance, we have the destination routing data," Rebecca announced, breaking the silence. I turned away from the window and walked back to the head of the table. The main screen refreshed, displaying a complex web of financial transfers. The $62,000 had not gone into Colin's personal savings account. It had not gone into a secret brokerage account or an offshore trust. The money had been systematically wired directly to 3 different high-yield credit card companies. Colin was paying off massive consumer debt. "Pull up the names on those credit accounts," Jason instructed, leaning over the table. Rebecca pressed a button and the names populated on the screen in stark black text. Bethany Blackwell. Bethany Blackwell. Bethany Blackwell. The air left my lungs in a sudden, sharp exhale. Jason actually gasped, taking a step back from the table. I stared at the name on the screen, the letters burning themselves into my retinas. Colin had not stolen my money to fund a secret gambling addiction or a hidden mistress. He had embezzled my hard-earned savings to pay off his sister's catastrophic credit card debt. The pieces of the Blackwell family dynamic snapped together with terrifying clarity. Bethany was the untouchable golden child, the perfect daughter who lived a curated life of absolute luxury on social media. She was the one who sneered at my clothes, who called my daughter baggage, who demanded I leave my child in a freezing garage because we did not fit her flawless aesthetic. But her entire life was a carefully constructed, incredibly expensive fraud. She was drowning in debt, maintaining an illusion of extreme wealth she could not actually afford. And when the walls started closing in on her, when the creditors started calling, and the fake lifestyle threatened to collapse, She did what the golden child always does. She cried to her family. Colin had stepped in to play the hero. He wanted to maintain his sister's fake prestige and protect his parents from the social embarrassment of having a bankrupt daughter, but Colin did not have his own money to save her. So he looked at the joint wedding account sitting quietly at the bank, heavily funded by his clueless IT consultant fiancé. He had looked at my money, my savings, and decided his sister's designer handbags were more important than our future. He stole from me to fund her arrogant delusion. "This is incredible," Jason said, a massive predatory grin taking over his face. He looked at me, his eyes alight with legal victory. "Do you understand what you are holding right now, Hazel? Trent Bolton just threatened to drag you through court for palimony. He wants to argue that Colin is entitled to half your assets because of a shared financial vision. We just found out his shared financial vision involved committing felony embezzlement to fund his sister's shopping addiction. The minute we present this at mediation, Trent Bolton is going to drop his client faster than a burning match." I did not smile. The betrayal was too deep, too structurally rotten to warrant a smile, but I felt a surge of absolute, undeniable power. The Blackwell family had tried to destroy my reputation. They had tried to publicly shame me and legally extort me. They thought their social standing gave them the right to trample over anyone they deemed beneath them. But their entire empire of arrogance was built on stolen money. My stolen money. "Print every single ledger," I commanded, my voice echoing off the glass with a cold metallic edge. "Bind them into individual portfolios. I want 4 copies perfectly indexed and highlighted. 1 for Jason, 1 for me, 1 for Colin, and 1 for Trent Bolton. We are not just going to threaten them, Jason. We are going to completely obliterate their reality." Jason nodded sharply, already gesturing for the analysts to start compiling the physical documents. "I want the mediation scheduled for tomorrow morning." I continued, walking back toward my private office. "Call Trent Bolton. Tell him I am ready to negotiate. Tell him I have reviewed his demands and I want to settle this matter face to face. Let Colin and his mother walk into that room thinking they have broken me. Let them taste the victory. I want them at the absolute peak of their arrogance when I slide this audit across the table." I closed the door to my office, leaving the frenzy of the boardroom behind me. I sat at my desk and looked at the framed photo of Lily smiling in her winter coat. They had tried to make her feel small. They had tried to make her feel like she did not belong in their grand, beautiful world. Tomorrow I was going to tear their fake world down to the studs. The palimony suit was supposed to be their ultimate weapon. Instead, it was the exact shovel I needed to dig their financial graves. The hunt was officially over. Tomorrow, the execution would begin. The heavy oak doors of the mediation center closed with a soft thud, sealing us inside the neutral territory of a downtown legal suite. The room was designed to facilitate compromise, featuring a massive mahogany table and plush leather chairs, meant to keep hostile parties comfortable during long negotiations. I took my seat next to Jason, my posture perfectly straight, my expression an unreadable mask of absolute calm. Across the wide expanse of polished wood sat the opposition. Colin looked remarkably different from the panicked, sweating mess who had pounded on my apartment door just a few nights ago. He wore a sharp navy suit, his hair perfectly styled, radiating an unearned, arrogant confidence. Patricia sat to his left wearing her signature pearls and a smug, condescending smile. She looked at me not as a woman who was days away from being evicted, but as an aristocratic queen observing a rebellious peasant. To Colin's right sat Trent Bolton, the aggressive attorney they had hired to orchestrate my financial ruin. Bolton was exactly the kind of loud, theatrical lawyer I expected. He wore a flashy pinstriped suit and leaned back in his chair with his hands steepled, tapping his index fingers together in a slow, rhythmic motion. He looked at Jason and me with the predatory amusement of a wolf cornering a rabbit. He genuinely believed he held all the winning cards. Jason placed a single sleek black leather folder in front of me, resting his hands flat on the table. He did not say a word, allowing the thick silence to stretch and amplify the tension in the room. Colin shifted slightly in his chair, a brief flash of nervousness breaking through his curated facade before Bolton placed a reassuring hand on his forearm. Let us get right down to business. Bolton began, his voice loud and artificially smooth, designed to dominate the physical space. My client has been incredibly generous in agreeing to a mediation session today. We all know the reality of the situation, Miss Vance. You engaged in a serious cohabitation arrangement with Colin that functioned as a partnership. You shared financial goals, a home, and a unified vision for your corporate endeavors. Now you are attempting to unlawfully withhold marital assets and brutally evict his elderly parents out of pure vindictive spite. Bolton paused, pulling a thick stack of papers from his briefcase and dropping them onto the table with a loud theatrical slap. The heavy thud echoed off the acoustic paneling of the room. It was a calculated prop meant to intimidate me, to make me feel the crushing weight of the legal system he claimed to control. We are prepared to file an aggressive, comprehensive palimony suit by the end of the business day. He continued, leaning forward to invade my visual space. His expensive cologne smelled sharp and metallic. We will claim 50% of the assets held by Zenith Holdings, including the deed to the Blackwell estate. We are also prepared to subpoena your clients, your corporate vendors, and your executive partners to testify under oath regarding the extent of Colin's involvement in your business. It will be a very public, very messy, very destructive process that will undoubtedly decimate your professional reputation in the Chicago tech sector. Patricia let out a soft, breathy sigh of profound satisfaction. She reached up to adjust her imported pearls, a gesture of pure elite condescension. I tried to tell you, Hazel, she said, her voice dripping with fake maternal pity. We could have handled your little emotional outburst quietly. We could have been a family. I was willing to forgive your dreadful lack of manners on my porch. But you chose to be difficult. Now you have to face the adult consequences of your actions. Colin deserves what is rightfully his after putting up with your deception and your secret corporate accounts. Colin puffed out his chest, attempting to look like the wronged hero of the story. He adjusted his silk tie, trying to project the image of a wealthy magnate. I do not want to destroy you, Hazel, he said, adopting a tone of magnanimous forgiveness that made my stomach turn. I just want what is fair for the time I invested in us. If you sign the house over to my parents today and waive the ridiculous claim for back rent, I will tell Trent to drop the lawsuit completely. We can walk away clean and keep your business out of the press. I am giving you an easy, generous way out. Please just be smart and take it. I let his words hang in the air, allowing the sheer magnitude of their delusion to settle into the room. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I reached out and rested my fingertips lightly on the black leather folder Jason had placed in front of me. The leather was cool and smooth beneath my touch. That is a fascinating narrative, I stated, my voice perfectly level and icy cold. You paint a beautiful picture of a shared financial vision, Colin. You speak of partnership, trust, and mutual growth. It is incredibly moving. It is also a complete fabrication. I opened the black folder and removed 4 securely bound packets of financial documents. I kept one and slid the other 3 across the smooth mahogany table. One stopped directly in front of Colin. One stopped in front of Patricia. The final packet slid perfectly into Trent Bolton's hands. Since we are discussing our shared financial vision, I continued, I thought it would be prudent to review the joint checking account we opened 6 months ago. The account I funded with over $80,000 of my hard-earned money, specifically for our wedding expenses. The account you insisted on managing Colin to take the stress off my plate. Colin looked down at the packet, his arrogant smile freezing in place, as if he had been struck by lightning. Patricia frowned, adjusting her designer reading glasses to read the bold print on the top page. Trent Bolton opened the packet with a casual flick of his wrist, but as his eyes scanned the first heavily highlighted spreadsheet, his confident posture vanished instantly. The blood literally drained from his face. I commissioned a brutal, comprehensive forensic audit of that account yesterday. I informed them, my voice slicing through the quiet room like a serrated blade. We deployed 12 corporate accountants. We tracked every single outbound wire transfer down to the minute. We traced every routing number through the federal banking system. And we made a very interesting discovery regarding your definition of marital assets, Colin. Colin's face drained of all color, turning a sickly pale shade of gray. His hands began to tremble so violently that the heavy paper he was holding shook audibly, rattling in the quiet room. He could not speak. His vocal cords seemed completely paralyzed by sudden abject terror. He knew exactly what I had found. "You did not just lie about your family's wealth, Colin," I said, leaning forward, my eyes locking onto his terrified gaze, forcing him to look at me. "You are a thief. You systematically embezzled $62,400 from our joint wedding fund. You executed staggered wire transfers, deliberately keeping the amounts just under the fraud alert threshold to avoid banking detection. You stole my money over a period of 5 months while smiling in my face and telling me you loved me." Patricia gasped, dropping the packet onto the table as if it had burned her fingers. She pressed a hand to her chest, her breathing suddenly shallow. "That is a lie," she shrieked, her carefully maintained elegance shattering instantly into pieces. "My son is not a thief. You are fabricating these documents to frame him because you are a spiteful, bitter woman." I turned my gaze to Patricia, my expression devoid of any mercy or hesitation. "Turn to page 4. Patricia." I commanded, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "Look at the destination routing accounts. Your son did not steal my money to buy himself a sports car or fund a secret gambling habit. He stole my money and wired it directly to 3 high-yield credit card companies. The accounts belong entirely to your daughter, Bethany Blackwell. Your golden child has been drowning in catastrophic consumer debt to maintain her fake luxury lifestyle on social media, and your son committed felony embezzlement to bail her out, using my hard-earned money." Patricia stared at page 4, her mouth opening and closing in silent horror as she read her daughter's name printed over and over again next to the stolen amounts. The absolute truth of her family's moral bankruptcy hit her like a physical blow. The illusion was dead. Trent Bolton, the aggressive theatrical lawyer, was suddenly acting like a man who had stepped on a live landmine. He flipped frantically through the rest of the forensic audit, his eyes widening with every page. He was a sleazy lawyer, but he was not an idiot. He recognized airtight, undisputable evidence of a major financial crime when he saw it. The palimony suit he had drafted was now less than worthless. It was a massive radioactive liability. "This is not a negotiation anymore, Trent," Jason said, speaking for the first time since we entered the room. His voice was laced with pure predatory satisfaction. "Your client just walked into a mediation and threatened my client with public exposure while actively concealing a felony grand theft. If this goes to a judge, Colin goes to a state penitentiary for a very long time." Bolton swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He turned to Colin, his voice furious and hushed. "You told me you had a legitimate claim. You told me there was no financial misconduct. You lied to me. You are holding a ticking bomb, Colin." "I am giving you exactly one exit, Colin," I stated, reclaiming absolute control of the room. "You are not going to sue me. You are not going to get the house. And you are certainly not going to walk away clean. Here are my terms. You will instantly and permanently withdraw this ridiculous palimony lawsuit. You will sign a legally binding ironclad non-disclosure agreement, preventing you, your mother, and your sister from ever speaking my name or discussing my business in public or private ever again." I pulled a single sheet of paper from the back of my folder and slid it toward him. "And finally, you will sign this sworn notarized confession admitting to the embezzlement of $62,400 from our joint account." Colin stared at the confession letter, his eyes filling with panicked tears. "I cannot sign," that he whispered, his voice cracking completely. "If I sign a confession, my career is over. No financial firm will ever hire me again. If you do not sign it, I will have you arrested for grand larceny before you can validate your parking ticket," I replied coldly. "I will hand this forensic audit directly to the district attorney today. You will be criminally charged, you will stand trial, and you will go to prison. Signing this confession keeps you out of a jail cell, but it gives me the ultimate insurance policy. If your mother, your sister, or you ever try to cross me again, I will take this confession straight to the police." Patricia was sobbing quietly into her hands, her entire world completely decimated. Colin looked frantically at his lawyer, begging for a way out. Trent Bolton did not hesitate. He pushed the confession letter directly in front of Colin and handed him a premium silver pen. "Sign the paper." Colin Bolton ordered, his voice completely stripped of its previous arrogance. "She has you dead to rights. If you fight this, you will go to prison. Take the deal and pray she never enforces it." Colin's hand shook violently as he took the pen. He looked at me one last time, searching for any trace of the woman who had loved him. He found nothing but a fortress of ice. He lowered his head, tears spilling onto the mahogany table, and signed his name on the confession. He signed away his pride, his leverage, and his future. The checkmate was absolute and the execution was flawless. Jason neatly collected the signed confession, sliding it into the black leather folder with the crisp efficiency of an undertaker. I did not offer Colin a parting glance. I simply stood up, smoothed the lapels of my tailored suit, and walked out of the downtown mediation center into the brisk Chicago afternoon. The crisp winter air tasted incredibly sweet. I had successfully secured my assets, protected my daughter's future, and permanently neutralized the threat they posed. But the true beauty of dismantling a toxic family is that you rarely have to strike every single member yourself. Once you remove the foundational lie, the entire house of cards collapses under its own rotten weight. The Blackwell family had spent decades operating on the delusion of infinite wealth. Now that the Bank of Hazel was completely closed, their reality violently unraveled. Colin was entirely ruined. He had no savings left, no secret wedding fund to tap into, and a signed felony confession hanging over his head like a sharpened guillotine. He could not afford to help his parents secure a new apartment, let alone maintain his own expensive downtown lifestyle. The 30-day eviction notice I had served Patricia was rapidly expiring, forcing her and her husband to frantically pack up their sprawling suburban estate. They were reduced to boxing up their imported crystal while dodging calls from their country club friends who were already whispering about the moving trucks. But the most spectacular implosion was reserved for the golden child herself. Bethany Blackwell had built her entire identity on a mountain of high-interest debt and carefully curated social media posts. She lived in a pristine luxury condo, dined exclusively at Michelin-starred restaurants, and wore seasonal designer collections that she proudly flaunted to her thousands of online followers. Her husband, Greg, was a senior finance broker who cared about exactly two things: his pristine public image and his rapidly growing bank account. Greg had married Bethany under the strict assumption that she was the heiress to a massive real estate fortune. He enjoyed the prestige of the Blackwell name and enthusiastically participated in their elitist charade. He believed he had married into a powerful dynasty. He had no idea he had legally bound himself to a catastrophic financial black hole. For the past 5 months, Colin's embezzled funds had acted as a crucial dam, holding back the flood of Bethany's catastrophic spending habits. Whenever her platinum credit cards maxed out, Colin would quietly wire thousands of my dollars to clear the balances. It was a sick, symbiotic relationship that allowed Bethany to play the wealthy socialite without facing consequences. But with Colin's theft exposed and his accounts frozen, that financial dam completely evaporated. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Just 4 days after the mediation, Checkmate Bethany scheduled a lavish afternoon of treatments at an exclusive downtown spa. She had invited 3 wealthy influencer friends, planning to treat them to champagne and deep tissue massages. When she approached the marble reception desk to settle the exorbitant bill, she casually handed over her signature platinum card. The receptionist swiped it once, frowned, and swiped it again. The machine chimed with a harsh, flat tone of rejection. Bethany laughed it off as a banking error and produced a second card. Declined. She handed over a third card, her smile turning panicked. Declined. Her friends watched in uncomfortable silence as the receptionist politely informed Bethany that every single account she possessed was frozen due to severe delinquency. Bethany was forced to call Greg from the spa lobby, her voice trembling with humiliation, to ask him to cover the bill. Greg paid the spa over the phone, but the damage was irreparably done. The social embarrassment was absolute, and the news of Bethany's declined cards swept through their elite friend group before she reached the parking garage. When Bethany returned to their luxury condo, she found Greg standing in the center of their living room holding a stack of financial documents. The furious, dark expression on his face told her that the illusion was entirely dead. Greg was a finance broker, and when he suspected something was wrong with his money, he dug deep. He had spent the afternoon running a comprehensive audit of their household finances. What he found horrified him. He discovered that his wife possessed over $90,000 in hidden consumer debt, spread across multiple secret accounts. But Greg did not just find the debt. The tight-knit community of Chicago wealth managers is essentially a highly educated gossip mill. Rumors of the Blackwell family's spectacular downfall had already begun circulating through the prestigious financial district. Greg had made a few discreet phone calls to his most trusted banking colleagues and finally uncovered the absolute truth. He learned that his wealthy in-laws were secretly bankrupt and currently facing a humiliating eviction from their suburban mansion. He learned that his brother-in-law was utterly broke and facing legal trouble. And most devastatingly, he learned exactly how Bethany had been keeping her creditors at bay for the past 6 months. Greg threw the credit card statements onto the glass coffee table, his voice echoing sharply in the pristine condo. "You have been lying to me since the day we met," he shouted, staring at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You are not a wealthy heiress, Bethany. Your family is entirely bankrupt. Your parents are being evicted from their mansion next week. And you have secretly buried us in a mountain of debt just to buy designer shoes you cannot afford." Bethany burst into theatrical tears, attempting to use the same manipulative tactics that had always worked on her parents. "Greg, please," she sobbed, stepping forward to grab his arm. "I can explain. My family just hit a rough patch. Colin was helping me manage the accounts. It is just a temporary cash flow problem. We are the Blackwells. We will bounce back." Greg violently shook off her hand, stepping back as if she were contagious. "Do not try to gaslight me," he growled. "I know exactly how Colin was helping you. He was not managing your accounts. He was actively stealing money from his fiancé. He embezzled tens of thousands of dollars from a single mother just to pay for your pathetic shopping addiction. You funded your fake luxury lifestyle with money stolen from a 6-year-old child's mother." Bethany froze, the fake tears drying instantly on her cheeks. The absolute horror of realizing her deepest, most toxic secret was fully exposed rendered her speechless. She had always viewed my daughter and me as disposable peasants, unworthy of her elite presence. Now her husband knew that her entire elite presence was literally funded by my hard work. The ultimate golden child had been unmasked as a parasitic fraud. "You are a parasite," Greg stated, echoing my exact sentiments. "I married a partner, not a financial liability, who commits accessory to fraud. I spend my entire life advising clients on wealth management, and my own wife is a staggering bankrupt liability who uses stolen funds to buy luxury handbags. You are a complete embarrassment to me professionally and personally." He did not wait for her to formulate another lie. He walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up a pair of heavy brass scissors. In front of her terrified eyes, Greg pulled every joint credit card from his wallet and cut them directly in half, letting the plastic pieces fall to the floor. "I am freezing every joint account we possess," he declared. "I am cutting off your access to my income immediately. You will not spend another dime of my money to maintain this pathetic charade." Bethany fell to her knees on the expensive Persian rug, sobbing genuinely now as the walls of her curated life rapidly collapsed. "Greg, what am I supposed to do?" she wailed. "Where am I supposed to go? My parents are losing their house. I have absolutely nothing." "That sounds like a personal problem," Greg replied, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You should start packing those expensive bags you bought with stolen money. My lawyers will be filing the divorce papers tomorrow morning. I want you out of this condo by the end of the weekend." He grabbed his coat and walked out the front door, slamming it shut behind him. Bethany was left completely alone, sitting on the floor, surrounded by the severed pieces of her credit cards. In the span of a single afternoon, her entire universe had been violently corrected. She had lost her husband, her home, her financial security, and her social standing. Her perfect curated online life was permanently shattered. She could no longer post photos of expensive brunches or luxury vacations. She could no longer look down on single mothers working honest jobs. She had been reduced to exactly what she always was, an arrogant, empty fraud entirely dependent on others. Without Colin's stolen funds to protect her, and without Greg's income to support her, Bethany was forced to face the brutal reality of the real world. The creditors she had ignored for months immediately began aggressive collection tactics. Her phone rang constantly with automated demands for payment. The influencer friends she had tried to impress at the spa stopped answering her messages. High society is notoriously cruel to those who fall from grace, and the rumors of her husband filing for divorce over stolen money made her an absolute social pariah. Nobody wanted to be associated with a toxic, bankrupt fraud. The Golden Sister had finally crashed to the ground, and there was absolutely no one left to catch her. She would finally learn what actual hard work truly felt like. The weekend passed with a profound sense of absolute closure. I spent Saturday morning helping Lily build a massive cardboard castle in the center of our living room, and Sunday afternoon baking her favorite chocolate chip cookies. The chaotic, frantic energy of the Blackwell family was completely erased from our lives. By Tuesday afternoon, the biting winter chill had softened slightly, giving way to a crisp, bright sky. I left my downtown executive office early to pick Lily up from her private elementary school. The campus was a beautiful, sprawling facility with manicured green lawns and classic brick buildings. I joined the line of luxury vehicles in the pickup lane, enjoying the quiet hum of classical music playing on my car stereo. When the final bell rang, a steady stream of children in neat navy blue uniforms flooded out of the main heavy oak doors. I spotted Lily immediately. She was laughing brightly with a group of her friends, her colorful backpack bouncing lightly against her shoulders. I stepped out of my car to greet her, feeling a deep swell of intense gratitude. I had successfully insulated her from the toxicity that had almost consumed our future. I knelt down to give her a tight hug, wrapping my arms securely around her small frame. She smelled like finger paint and fresh outside air. We were safe. We were entirely untouchable. But the universe has a funny way of delivering the final remnants of a storm just when you think the sky has completely cleared. As I stood up to open the rear passenger door for Lily, a sudden harsh screech of tires echoed aggressively across the pristine parking lot. A battered yellow taxicab pulled up recklessly against the curb, blocking the designated student crosswalk. The back door of the cab flew open before the vehicle had even come to a complete stop. A woman stumbled out onto the pavement, nearly tripping over her own feet. For a fraction of a second, I did not even recognize her. She looked entirely feral. Her normally perfect blonde hair was severely matted and pulled back into a messy, uneven knot. She was wearing oversized gray sweatpants and a stained designer sweater that looked like it had been slept in for multiple days. She had absolutely no makeup on, and her face was blotchy red and swollen from hours of intense crying. It was Bethany. The untouchable golden child of the elite Blackwell family had been reduced to a frantic, disheveled mess. She slammed the heavy cab door shut, and her wild, frantic eyes scanned the crowded parking lot. The moment her gaze locked onto me, her face twisted into a terrifying mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Hazel!" She screamed, her voice tearing violently through the polite quiet of the school pickup line. Several wealthy parents turned their heads in absolute shock. The crossing guards paused immediately, lowering their neon stop signs. Bethany did not care about the audience or the scene she was causing. She marched aggressively across the asphalt, pushing forcefully past a group of startled mothers. She was vibrating with chaotic, desperate energy. "Hazel, you completely ruined my life!" she shrieked, pointing a violently shaking finger directly at my chest. I immediately stepped in front of Lily, shielding my daughter entirely from Bethany's line of sight. I kept my posture perfectly rigid, my face completely devoid of any emotional reaction. "Open the car door, sweetie," I said quietly over my shoulder to Lily, keeping my voice steady and calm. Climb into your seat and put your noise-canceling headphones on. I will be right there. Lily, being the incredibly smart and resilient child she is, sensed the imminent danger instantly. She quickly slipped into the back seat and pulled the heavy reinforced door shut behind her, locking it with a solid mechanical click. With my daughter safely secured behind tinted glass, I turned my full attention to the unhinged woman standing mere feet away from me. Bethany was practically foaming at the mouth. Her chest heaved with heavy exertion and her hands were balled into tight, white-knuckled fists at her sides. "Do you have any idea what you have done to me?" she wailed, her voice cracking under the crushing weight of her own hysteria. "Greg threw me out of our luxury condo. He filed for divorce yesterday morning and locked me out of the building. He cut off every single one of my credit cards and completely emptied my checking accounts. I had to sleep on a friend's cramped couch last night, and they asked me to leave this morning because they saw the terrible rumors online. I have absolutely nothing left. My entire life is completely destroyed." She took a threatening step closer, invading my personal space, her breath smelling faintly of stale alcohol and sheer unfiltered panic. "You did this to me!" She spat, venom lacing every single syllable that left her mouth. "You and your fake money and your psychotic need for revenge. You deliberately set us up to fail. You convinced Colin to help me just so you could use the bank records against us. You stole my parents' beautiful house, and you single-handedly destroyed my perfect marriage. You are an absolute monster, Hazel." The surrounding parents were openly staring now, whispering frantically to one another, as they quickly ushered their own children into their vehicles to escape the drama. The school security guard began walking briskly toward us, his hand resting firmly on his radio, ready to call for backup. Bethany was completely oblivious to the massive public spectacle she was creating. She was so entirely consumed by her own manufactured victimhood that she genuinely believed she was the wronged party, screaming for righteous justice. She wanted me to feel deep, agonizing guilt. She wanted me to break down in tears and apologize for holding her accountable. She wanted me to reach into my expensive purse and hand her a blank corporate check to make her nightmare simply go away. She was waiting for the compliant, timid single mother she thought she knew to submit to her aggressive elite demands. I let her scream. I let her exhaust her vocal cords until she was literally gasping for thin air. I did not flinch or step back. I did not raise my voice to match her frantic, unhinged pitch. True power does not ever require screaming. True power is absolute, terrifying stillness in the face of manufactured chaos. When she finally ran out of breath, leaving a heavy, ringing silence in the cold winter air, I took a single, deliberate step forward. I stepped directly into her personal space, forcing her to look up into my eyes. She flinched slightly, visibly intimidated by my complete lack of fear. I spoke in a voice that was barely above a quiet whisper, but laced with enough absolute ice to freeze her blood. "I did not ruin your family," I said, pronouncing every single word with brutal, articulate precision. "I just stopped funding your illusion." Bethany blinked, her mouth falling open slightly as the heavy words struck her. I held her panicked gaze, refusing to let her look away for even a second. "Your brother is a thief." I continued, my voice perfectly steady and utterly unforgiving. "He is a pathetic coward who actively embezzled money from the woman he promised to marry simply because he was too weak to tell you no. Your mother is a cruel bully who covers up her massive, catastrophic financial failures by belittling innocent children on her front porch. And you, Bethany, are a complete fraud. You built a fake luxury life using stolen money because you have absolutely no discernible skills and zero moral compass. You are an empty, shallow shell of a human being." Large tears began to spill rapidly down her blotchy cheeks, but they were no longer tears of entitled anger. They were tears of profound, terrifying realization. She was finally hearing the brutal, unvarnished truth she had spent her entire adult life running away from. "None of this is my fault," I whispered, leaning in slightly closer, so only she could hear my final verdict. "I gave your parents 6 months of free rent. I gave your brother a genuine opportunity to be an honest man. I gave your entire family a beautiful chance to welcome us. You threw it all back in my face because you falsely thought you were better than me. You actually thought you were untouchable. But the only real difference between us is that I actually work for everything I have. And starting today, you have to pay for it yourselves." The sharp words landed like physical heavy blows to her chest. Bethany's knees actually buckled under the crushing weight of reality. All the aggressive manic energy drained completely out of her body, leaving her entirely hollow and physically weak. She dropped straight down to the cold, hard asphalt of the parking lot, collapsing in a miserable heap of oversized sweatpants and shattered pride. She buried her face deep in her shaking hands and began to sob openly, a raw, agonizing sound of total, absolute defeat. She was mourning the permanent death of her fake identity. She had absolutely nothing left to leverage against the world. Her physical beauty could not save her, her family name was completely worthless, and her wealthy husband was gone forever. She was just a broke, unemployed fraud crying uncontrollably on the dirty pavement. I looked down at her shaking form, feeling absolutely nothing. The basic human pity I might have once felt for a broken woman was entirely absent from my heart. She had meticulously earned every single ounce of her current misery. I turned my back on her and signaled clearly to the approaching security guard, giving him a polite professional nod to indicate that the situation was fully under control. I opened my car door and slid gracefully into the plush driver's seat, closing the heavy door, securely shutting out the pathetic sound of her endless weeping. I looked up into the rearview mirror. Lily was happily watching a colorful animated cartoon on her tablet, entirely unbothered by the dramatic collapse occurring just outside her window. I smiled warmly, putting the luxury SUV into gear. As I drove slowly and carefully out of the elite school parking lot, I glanced at the side mirror one last time. Bethany was still huddled tightly on the cold asphalt, a small, insignificant speck fading quickly in the rearview mirror. The ultimate golden child was finally experiencing the brutal, unforgiving reality of the real world. I merged smoothly onto the main road, heading back to my beautiful, safe home, leaving the absolute wreckage of the Blackwell family behind me forever. Exactly 2 weeks after Bethany collapsed in the school parking lot, the final countdown on the Blackwell family eviction notice dropped to a mere 3 days. While the moving boxes were surely piling up in her stolen mansion, Patricia Blackwell made one last, desperate gambit to preserve the illusion of her elite existence. It was the first Saturday of December, the night of the annual Chicago Children's Hospital Charity Gala. This was the crown jewel of the city's high society social calendar. It was an event where billionaires, old money aristocrats, and powerful politicians gathered in the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel to auction off diamond necklaces and write massive tax-deductible checks. In previous years, Patricia and her husband had attended as platinum-tier guests, purchasing a $30,000 table using heavily leveraged credit. Tonight, they were completely bankrupt. Her husband had refused to leave the house, paralyzed by the shame of their impending reality. But Patricia could not let it go. She was a woman who would happily drown as long as people admired the designer ship she was sinking on. Through a humiliating series of desperate phone calls, Patricia had managed to secure a single pity invitation from an old country club acquaintance. She arrived at the Drake Hotel, wearing a vintage emerald green gown she had borrowed from a neighbor under the guise of an outfit emergency. The dress was stunning, but it was clearly a season out of date and slightly too tight across her shoulders. Still, she held her chin high, masking her financial terror behind a thick layer of expensive foundation and her signature haughty expression. She walked into the magnificent ballroom, dripping in crystal chandeliers and towering white floral centerpieces, determined to control the narrative of her family's sudden disappearance from the social scene. I was already inside the ballroom when Patricia arrived. I stood quietly on the elevated VIP balcony overlooking the glittering crowd, holding a glass of sparkling water. I wore a custom-tailored midnight blue velvet gown that draped perfectly to the floor, my hair swept up in an elegant classic twist. I was not hiding, but I was deliberately observing the room before taking my assigned seat. From my vantage point, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of Patricia as she immediately went to work. She grabbed a flute of champagne from a passing waiter and launched herself into a cluster of wealthy society wives standing near the ice sculpture. Even from the balcony, I could perfectly read the frantic, animated movements of her hands and the tragic, practiced pout on her lips. She was spinning her final web of lies. She leaned in close to the wives, speaking in hushed, dramatic tones. A close friend of Jason, my corporate attorney, happened to be standing in that exact circle and later relayed her exact words to me. Patricia was painting a masterpiece of complete fiction. She claimed that Colin had tragically fallen victim to a highly manipulative, psychotic woman who hid her true, unhinged nature until after the engagement. She whispered that I was a deranged gold digger who had orchestrated a massive legal extortion plot, attempting to steal their family estate through fraudulent shell companies. She told them that her poor, innocent son had barely escaped the relationship with his life and that the entire Blackwell family was currently enduring immense emotional distress because of my relentless, vindictive stalking. She played the role of the exhausted, heartbroken matriarch perfectly. She sighed heavily, pressing a hand to her chest, shaking her head in mock sorrow. The society wives nodded sympathetically, murmuring their outrage and offering their hollow condolences. Patricia was drinking in their pity, like a woman dying of thirst in the desert. She needed them to believe that she was the victim. If they believed her lies, they would not question why the Blackwells were suddenly downsizing. They would view her impending eviction not as a humiliating financial failure, but as the tragic consequence of a sociopath's attack. She was using my name to pave over the massive, catastrophic sinkhole of her own reality. I watched her operate for a full hour during the cocktail reception, feeling nothing but a profound sense of detached clinical fascination. She was a master manipulator, but her audience was about to receive a massive, undeniable reality check. A soft chime echoed through the ballroom speakers, signaling the end of the cocktail hour. The grand double doors to the main dining floor swung open and the orchestra began to play a sweeping classical arrangement. It was time for the guests to take their seats for the formal dinner and the evening's main presentation. I descended the sweeping marble staircase from the VIP balcony, my velvet gown brushing softly against the steps. The society wives, including Patricia, were guided by tuxedoed ushers toward the middle and back sections of the ballroom. Patricia was seated at a modest table near the kitchen doors, a glaring downgrade from her usual placement near the stage. I walked smoothly past the general seating area, moving directly to the very front of the room. I took my seat at the center table, reserved exclusively for the hospital board of directors and the platinum corporate sponsors. My presence went entirely unnoticed by Patricia, who was too busy complaining to her table mates about the draft from the kitchen doors. The dinner service was an elaborate affair of roasted sea bass and imported truffles. I ate quietly, making polite conversation with the chief of surgery, seated to my right. As the dessert plates were cleared, the heavy velvet curtains on the main stage parted. The chairman of the hospital board, a distinguished man with silver hair, stepped up to the crystal podium. The chatter in the massive ballroom faded into a respectful silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," the chairman began, his deep voice echoing perfectly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Tonight we are gathered to celebrate the resilience of our youngest patients and the incredible generosity of this community. This year, our hospital faced an unprecedented challenge. We needed to dramatically expand our pediatric oncology ward to accommodate the growing number of children who desperately need specialized life-saving care. The projected cost was astronomical. We worried that we would have to delay the project for years, leaving vulnerable families waiting for hope." He paused, looking out over the sea of wealthy donors, his expression shifting into one of profound gratitude. "But tonight, I am overwhelmed with joy to announce that the waiting is over. Just 3 weeks ago, our foundation received the single largest private donation in the history of this hospital. A donor stepped forward not just to contribute to the fund, but to single-handedly finance the entire construction and staffing of the new pediatric wing. Because of this extraordinary gift, we will break ground tomorrow morning. A collective gasp of genuine awe swept through the ballroom, followed immediately by thunderous applause. People looked around eagerly, attempting to spot the billionaire philanthropist responsible for such a monumental act of charity. Patricia leaned forward in her chair near the back, stretching her neck, hoping to catch a glimpse of the elite savior so she could later pretend they were close personal friends. The donor requested to remain anonymous during the initial transaction. The chairman continued raising a hand to quiet the excited crowd. However, we convinced her that her incredible leadership and her profound commitment to the safety of children deserved to be recognized tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the center platinum table and join me in expressing our deepest gratitude to the founder and chief executive officer of Zenith Holdings, Miss Hazel Vance. The applause erupted again, deafening and electric. At that exact moment, the ballroom technician hit the primary switch. A massive, brilliant white spotlight cut through the dim lighting of the room, sweeping directly over the crowd and landing squarely on me. The bright beam illuminated my midnight blue gown and caught the light of the simple diamond necklace resting against my collarbone. I stood up slowly from the center table, offering a graceful, polite smile to the cheering crowd. In the back of the room, sitting in the shadows near the kitchen doors, Patricia Blackwell physically stopped breathing. The crystal water goblet she was holding slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered against the floor, completely ignored by the applauding guests around her. The society wives who had just spent an hour listening to her call me a broke, psychotic gold digger now turned their heads to look at her in absolute stunned confusion. They looked from Patricia's pale, horrified face to the glowing, powerful woman standing in the center of the spotlight, single-handedly funding a hospital wing. In an instant, every single lie Patricia had spun during the cocktail hour evaporated into thin air, exposing her as a bitter, delusional fraud. I walked calmly toward the stage, the crowd parting respectfully to let me pass. I climbed the short flight of velvet stairs and stepped up to the crystal podium. The chairman shook my hand warmly and stepped back, yielding the microphone to me. I looked out over the glittering sea of faces, taking a slow, deep breath. My eyes scanned the massive room, easily locating the table near the kitchen doors. I locked eyes directly with Patricia. She looked like a woman standing in front of a firing squad. "Thank you," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, absolute authority that demanded total silence from the room. I did not grow up with wealth. I grew up understanding exactly what it means to go without, and what it means to feel small in a world that caters to the privileged. When my company Zenith Holdings found massive success this year, I knew exactly where the capital needed to go. It needed to go to the most vulnerable members of our society. I kept my eyes locked on Patricia, leaning slightly closer to the microphone. The words I spoke next were designed as a surgical strike meant only for her. There are people in this world who believe that a child's worth is determined by their bloodline, by their status, or by their ability to fit into a perfect visual aesthetic. There are people who will look at an innocent child and treat them with profound cruelty simply because they view them as an inconvenience to their own selfish vanity. We must reject that arrogant, toxic mindset entirely. A pin-drop silence fell over the ballroom as the raw emotion in my voice captivated the audience. I gripped the sides of the podium, my posture unbreakable. Every child, regardless of their background, deserves to be treated with absolute dignity and respect. They deserve to be warm, they deserve to be safe, and they deserve to be welcomed. We have a fundamental moral obligation to protect them from those who would push them out into the cold. Building this pediatric wing is not just about medical care. It is about creating a sanctuary where every single child knows that they are incredibly valuable and deeply loved. The entire ballroom erupted into a standing ovation. The applause was thunderous, shaking the very foundation of the room. The society wives at Patricia's table were on their feet, clapping vigorously, moved to tears by the speech. Patricia remained frozen in her chair, completely unable to stand, entirely paralyzed by the crushing, absolute weight of her public humiliation. She had tried to destroy my reputation in the shadows, but I had just dismantled her entire reality in the brightest spotlight possible. I offered one final polite nod to the cheering crowd, turned gracefully away from the podium, and walked off the stage. The dagger had been thrown, and it had hit its target with absolute lethal perfection. As I descended the velvet stairs from the main stage, the energy in the grand ballroom shifted entirely in my direction. The society wives who had spent the cocktail hour eagerly consuming Patricia's toxic lies now surged forward to intercept me. They practically tripped over their expensive evening gowns in their desperate rush to be the first to congratulate the billionaire philanthropist. I was instantly surrounded by a tight circle of glittering diamonds and imported perfumes. They showered me with aggressive flattery, praising my business acumen, my stunning dress, and my moving speech about protecting children. The irony was incredibly thick. These were the exact same women who had murmured sympathetically when Patricia called me a deranged gold digger just an hour prior. Now they were begging for my business card and inviting me to their exclusive private luncheons. High society operates on a very simple, brutal currency, and I had just proven that I held the largest bank account in the room. Through the sea of enthusiastic faces, I kept my peripheral vision locked on the table near the kitchen doors. Patricia was attempting to salvage her dignity. She stood up shakily, smoothing the wrinkles from her borrowed emerald gown, and tried to insert herself into the edge of the circle surrounding me. She offered a weak, trembling smile to the woman standing next to her, hoping to join the conversation. The society wife simply looked Patricia up and down with an expression of pure, freezing disdain, turned her back entirely, and stepped closer to me. The silent rejection was absolute. Within seconds, the rest of the table followed suit. Patricia Blackwell, the woman who had built her entire identity on social dominance, was completely ostracized in a room full of her peers. She was suddenly invisible. She was a ghost haunting a party she could no longer afford to attend. I politely excused myself from the circle of admirers, citing the need to speak with the hospital board members. I walked with slow, deliberate purpose toward the back of the ballroom. Patricia saw me approaching and physically shrank, backing up until her shoulders hit the heavy wood of the kitchen doors. Her eyes were wide with sheer terror. She had no clever remarks left. She had no fake maternal authority to hide behind. I stepped directly into her personal space, leaning in close enough to smell the stale champagne on her breath. My voice was perfectly calm, pleasant, and entirely lethal. You have exactly 3 days left to clear your things out of my house, Patricia. Do not leave a mess. I did not wait for her response. I simply walked away, leaving her to drown in the shallow, miserable puddle of her own shattered ego. 72 hours later, the absolute reality of her situation arrived in the form of 3 massive moving trucks idling heavily in the snowy driveway of the suburban estate. I did not attend the eviction personally. I had absolutely no desire to witness their pathetic scrambling. Instead, Jason sent a team of private security contractors to ensure the property was vacated promptly and without vandalism. Jason called me from the estate at precisely noon, delivering a highly satisfying play-by-play of the final collapse. It was a chaotic, humiliating scramble. Patricia wept uncontrollably on the front lawn, clutching a box of designer shoes, while the movers carelessly loaded her antique furniture into the trucks. Colin, pale and completely defeated, dragged heavy garbage bags full of clothes out of the garage, avoiding eye contact with the security team. Bethany, whose luxury condo had officially been repossessed the day before, sat on the frozen curb staring blankly into the distance. She looked like a woman who had just survived a shipwreck only to realize she was stranded on a deserted island with the 2 people she resented most. They had absolutely nowhere to go but the absolute bottom. With their bank accounts frozen, their reputations destroyed, and their credit scores completely decimated, they were forced to rent a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the extreme industrial edge of the city. The illusion of the great Blackwell dynasty ended in a dingy, poorly lit unit overlooking a noisy highway overpass. Patricia, Colin, and Bethany, 3 incredibly arrogant adults who despised each other, were now legally bound to share a single small bathroom and a tiny galley kitchen. They had to wake up every single morning and stare at the living, breathing consequences of their own cruelty. They had to listen to each other complain, argue, and blame one another for their total catastrophic ruin. It was a perfectly designed prison constructed entirely by their own greed and entitlement. I had simply locked the door from the outside. Back in the heart of the city, my universe was bathed in warm golden light. I stood in the massive gourmet kitchen of our beautiful home, tying a small floral apron around Lily's waist. The dark, toxic weight of the past 6 months was completely gone, entirely evaporated from our lives. The air in the house smelled like vanilla extract and melting chocolate. Lily stood on a small wooden step stool, carefully dropping chocolate chips into a massive bowl of cookie dough, her face a picture of pure, innocent concentration. I watched her small hands work, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute peace. She looked up at me, a smudge of flour on her nose, and smiled brightly. "These are going to be the best cookies ever, Mommy." I reached out and gently wiped the flour from her nose, returning her beautiful smile. "Yes, they are, my sweet girl. They are going to be absolutely perfect." I poured myself a cup of hot tea and leaned against the marble counter, watching my daughter thrive in a space where she was deeply, unconditionally loved. The journey had been incredibly difficult, but the lessons were invaluable. I had learned that blood and social status do not make a family. Respect, loyalty, and unwavering protection make a family. The ultimate victory was never about keeping the money or acquiring another massive piece of real estate. The true victory was protecting my daughter's self-worth. It was showing her that we do not shrink ourselves to accommodate toxic people. It was proving that when someone tries to force you out into the freezing cold, you do not beg them for a blanket. You simply walk away, take your warmth with you, and let them burn their own miserable house down to stay warm. I took a slow, peaceful sip of my tea. The storm was finally over, and our beautiful new dawn had just begun. Looking back on the absolute collapse of the Blackwell family, I realized that the greatest lesson had nothing to do with money or revenge. The true lesson was about the immense value of protecting your own peace and defining your own worth. For months, I had quietly shrunk myself to fit into their incredibly narrow, judgmental world. I convinced myself that if I was just agreeable enough and generous enough, I could finally earn their respect. But the harsh truth is that you can never earn the respect of people who are fundamentally committed to misunderstanding you. Patricia and Bethany taught me that extreme arrogance is almost always a desperate mask, hiding profound insecurity and failure. They built an entire identity on the illusion of superiority while secretly drowning in their own poor choices. Real power does not need to belittle a 6-year-old child to feel strong. Real power is quiet, grounded, and focused on building a beautiful life for the people who actually matter. The most loving thing you can do for yourself and your children is to aggressively protect your environment. Bloodlines and social status do not make a family. Mutual respect, unconditional support, and basic human kindness make a family. Never be afraid to walk away from a toxic situation, even if it means walking away alone. Walking away from Colin and his family was not a loss. It was the moment I finally reclaimed my future. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and walk away from a toxic relationship or a disrespectful family member? I would love to hear how you protected your own peace in the comments below. If my story resonated with you today, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience and reclaiming your power. Remember, your worth is not determined by how toxic people treat you.